Hey there, this is Promise Phelon, the Chief Growth Officer of the Growth Warrior Company. Welcome to our podcast called the Warrior Cast. Hello there, this is Promise Phelon, the Chief Growth Officer and founder of the Growth Warrior Company. I'm about to interview a powerhouse. She is the EVP and General Manager of Government Solutions at Verra Mobility. Now that's about $100+ million organization in a publicly traded, recently IPO'd company. Now, this woman, Liz Caracciolo, is a longtime friend of mine, a basketball co-conspirator, and someone who I just have a tremendous amount of respect for. And she brings to us in this conversation a lot of insights around a concept that you'll learn from the Growth Warrior Company about being anti-fragile. All right, enjoy. I'm here with Liz Caracciolo, all the way here from Scottsdale, Arizona. Say hello, Liz.
Hey, Promise.
So it's cool. I've known Liz for most of my young life. And our relationship started actually in the late 90s when Liz was leading a sales organization back at Nestle. And so our relationship as her career has evolved in some amazing ways. And so my goal of this podcast is to have Liz just share her experience with us. And then I've asked her to talk a little bit about anti-fragile and the whole concept of building new relationships that thrive on stress, or at least that evolve from it. You'll hear Liz talk about everything from, her current experience going IPO with an incredible company, but also, being a Six Sigma black belt, an Ironman, and being an incredible basketball player and someone who was a captain of her college basketball team at Cornell. So I'll turn it over to Liz and just have her kind of give us some context on her background and where she's come from and how she got here today, sitting in my car under a bridge in Berkeley.
Sure. So born and raised partly on Long Island to Italians on both sides. So if that doesn't already tell you enough, a New York Italian. But you don't hear it in my accent, if you will, because we started to migrate across Arizona as I was growing up. And one way to get rid of an accent really quickly is to live in a small town in Indiana and be continually harassed with anything that comes out of your mouth. So I adapted, and over time we moved out to the desert, where I've spent probably the majority of not only some of my growing up years, but also my adult years, moving back to Arizona about 15 years ago. So at this point, I've lived in nearly the four corners of the U.S. I've lived in some urban environments and more suburban environments, and have worked for startups all the way to the largest corporations on the exchange.
Yeah. And what's consistent, like if you look at Honeywell, right, which is massive conglomerate, Nestle, which has kind of similar features to BillingTree, and all the different organizations that you've been through sort of as they've grown. You've been through M&A, you've been through acquisition where you've bought companies. You've always had kind of a front-facing customer view, right? So running sales teams to running customer success organizations to now running, 150, obviously confidential, but a very large 9-figure business. You've always been in front of the customer. So you get anti-fragility, right, as a concept. So is there a stream from being the captain of a basketball team at an Ivy League school, all the way through your career? Have there been lessons that you've learned or gleaned about being anti-fragile and having relationships evolve through stress? I mean, what are some of your lessons?
I think fundamentally, I guess there's a couple of things that sort of ground that, to me, the anti-fragile aspect, whether it's working with a team, being on a team, or working directly with clients. At the end of the day, most of us want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, or be a part of something important. And we're most connected to folks that are in it with us
Right.
that we feel are in it with us, and share in that, that goal. And that can be customers as well. What I find that makes client relationships really resilient, particularly if you go through stressful times, is clients, they know that they have a need and they want to have a level of responsiveness to that need. So fundamentally, clients want to feel valued, like most people, and they want you to respond to what's important to them. It's really, really hard to deliver service perfectly all the time.
Right.
It's an incredibly hard thing to do. Even companies who we think have mastered that at times are imperfect. If I go to Starbucks, I don't always get, the right amount of cream or sugar in my coffee. But what they do is they're highly responsive to either what I want or the changes that I need. And it's amazing how far they've made a business around just knowing your name and delivering you something relatively consistent all the time. So we forgive Starbucks. I forgive Starbucks if occasionally they're off track, just as many customers will do. But if you're there for them in the time of need, trying to figure it out, being, in the space with them, that's really meaningful. Ultimately, you'll need to solve the problem. But what I find with customers is it's more important that you solve the need, not necessarily how you do it. And a lot of companies can get tripped up with the notion of that the customer is always right, and they take that so literally that the customer says, "This is exactly how I want my needs solved." And what I found over time is the customer wants their need met, but is very flexible to the how if they know that you're looking at a win-win.
And so you've brought up a couple of interesting points there. So the customer, quote unquote, is always right, may not be reality. And there might be some ability to negotiate around the edges of what that is and what that looks like, which I think is a brilliant point, especially for people running businesses where they're trying to take customers and clients from being this bespoke one-off to being something they can repeat and is scalable. So there's got to be an ability to negotiate. But you also talked about meeting the needs, but doing so in a way that is transparent. So failure is real. I mean, I imagine in your business today, you guys are, you're part of the whole transportation system and you're part of making roads safe. And so things don't always go perfectly. So how much of the sausage creation process do you expose to the customer? And if there is something that is untoward or is a mistake, like what are the steps that you've learned to take to respect the relationship and the boundaries, but also to be human and vulnerable?
Yeah, sure. Look, the relationship is built on doing what you say you're going to do. And there's lots of deposits you can make along the way before you're actually delivering your service. And that is how you respond to every interaction with the client. And so when you get to the point where you're actually talking about the service you're delivering or in the process of implementation, if you will, or negotiating the service that you want, ideally you're at a place already where you've made 50 deposits into that relationship that's built trust. And when you're open about the options and the pros and the cons, or why you would recommend a certain direction and how it benefits the client in the long term, but also benefits you, I find, all clients are in their own organizations and they realize that not everything is as simple as just as one approach, and that not one approach always ends up, particularly if it's lopsided. If the client wins, all of the time and you win little, they realize that has consequences as well. And so when clients talk about a true partnership, they understand that also means partnering with you as much as it means you partnering with them.
Again, a ton of nuggets. So the client or the customer also owning their side, right? And being realistic with expectations. One of the things that we talk about with the warriors and the people involved in this incredible organization is the idea of how to apologize. So, we talk about a concept that I mispronounce all the time, but it's called Hopana, which is a Hawaiian concept that was created by a scientist. Have you heard of this? Mm-hmm. It's basically apologizing with clear intent and doing so, assuming forgiveness. And so you are the first to say, I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. And so if you apply that in a business context, you say, this relationship is important. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. And you basically keep saying that until you are forgiven. And it's a weird thing to bring because you bring it out of the relationship sphere into business. But I imagine that, I mean, you've been in so many different types of companies delivering. I mean, you at one point, your company was acquired by Bank of America during the crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So,
crisis, that's right.
Right. So how do you apologize? I mean, things are always happening. What are some of the lessons learned in being vulnerable and apologizing and taking responsibility for things that naturally go on in a relationship?
I think certainly taking accountability and being upfront with that. You mentioned intent, and we all know what it feels like to have. I apologize that happened. As opposed to, I apologize for what I did or what we didn't do. But I think what may be different in a customer context is obviously following on with how that won't happen again.
Right, the repair.
A quick repair, a swift response. I would say that, again, the experiences I've had, we fell short in every case of having a perfect service delivery every single time. However, we rarely repeated the same mistake.
Right.
And so I think that that's really key, that, again, the relationship can continue to grow if it's building off of what's occurred before. And that's truly not only acknowledging the issue, but actually fixing the issue once and for all. And after that, the trust just gets stronger, the relationship gets stronger.
So part of it is apologizing, acknowledging that it happened, a quick repair, but also a learning throughout the organization what happened and what went wrong and how to avoid it in the future.
Sure, and it's very much like our personal relationships where you have a lot of faith. Everyone knows that, down the line, again, something may be imperfect. But
right.
What they can rely on is how you're going to respond to that and have faith and trust in that. And when customers have choices, that holds a lot of currency. That you may have not had a perfect track record, but they can really rely on how you're going to respond and recover. And that's not a mode of operation you always want to be in. We're being the fast recovery company, but certainly that's the room you're going to get, and certainly a foundation of trust.
And the forgiveness. No, I think that's huge. So over dinner, we both love basketball. And I think over the years, my love has grown basketball.
It's a great game.
But we were talking about Golden State Warriors, and I think we both have admiration for how they team. So you mentioned, okay, something happens with a customer, we apologize, we remedy it, we repair the situation, we codify how it's never going to happen again, and then change is affected inside the organization. Maybe DNA has to change. Maybe product has to change. So are there any analogies between how you look at, sports teams and how they change and affect and respond to situations, and how you've got hundreds of people reporting to you. How do you bring those same ideas from the basketball court into the corporation?
What I find is a direct parallel is that codifies teams and gets organizations, whether it's sports teams or teams at work, to rally together is an external orientation, which is the competition, and that puts everyone on the same page. That there's a goal we're aspiring to, and it's a shared objective.
Right.
That we are a team out there looking to outperform every other team. And that really neutralizes individual aspiration or individual contribution. And when particularly teams are thinking about clients, it very much gets everyone on the same page. Because it's not, you can find dynamics in companies where the client team can develop a prima donna-like orientation for a customer organization, and you hear things like, well, they're always, we're always just defaulting to the client, and you can get an internal dynamic that's unhealthy. But when you bring that another level and say our objective is to be better than our competition or to continue to exceed and achieve these ratings beyond our competition, it puts everyone on the same page and takes the client team out of the role of feeling as if they are directing the organization and the rest of the organization not feeling that they're subject to the whims of the client organization.
That's huge. So let me make a distinction and maybe challenge that. So let's use the basketball context. It's the last quarter. We've got 2 seconds on the timer, on the clock, and I get past the ball and it's the game point. I miss. Who's responsible? Because I imagine there are situations with customers that you've been in your career where it might be a team, it might be a person. So how do you ensure that there's a standard of expectation and a standard of performance that's at the level at which you want, but also that there's not blame? I don't know another word to use other than that, but like, how does it become a lesson? And then how do you also create accountability?
Yeah, that's a great question. While you win as a team and you lose as a team, that doesn't omit individuals being accountable to their role. And it really somewhat depends on the circumstance. But, a lot of times you can watch a football game and the kicker misses the field goal and, and it's easy to say, well, the kicker lost the field goal or lost the game. But the reality is there were thousands of moments before that as a team that they showed up, either showed up together or showed up differently, performed well, didn't perform well. And I think typically what will occur is if we don't get an outcome we want with a client, it's often more than one thing. And we can look and do a retrospective, if you will, and find many places where we weren't at our best. Because often when a client outcome is not positive, it usually isn't any one moment. It's a relationship, and the relationship has either been one that's been built upon trust of experiences or if it's eroded. And that's often the case, and that's not to say that there aren't times where someone has the ball and there is an expectation of performance and they're shooting 30%. And in those cases, you may need to hold that part of the organization or that individual accountable to their role that is necessary to play in order to have, repeat performance for the company. So it can depend, but ultimately for recurring relationships, you really have to look at all the parts and keep everyone focused on what they could be doing to outperform.
So basically, there shouldn't need to be a bunch of clutch moments, to use the basketball analogy. So we shouldn't need that last 2 seconds. The game should be won. By then.
You're up by 15, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. And so you said something really interesting when you were talking about, looking at all those micro moments. So was this the right customer for the business? How was the sales process? Was the sale communicated to all the internal constituents in a way where the expectations set? So you talk about all those micro moments and kind of looking back at those historically. But you made it really interesting. You used the word role and position in what you were saying. So do you see a distinction between that? So my title is my role, but I in a moment might need to play a different position. So do you ever look back and say, hey, how do we improve this person's skill set insofar as they weren't able to play the position that we needed for them to play in this difficult moment? So are there developmental opportunities for individuals when you go back and look at those micro moments, and kind of how do you handle those?
I think I tend to, of course, there are development moments. And again, when you're clear on what someone's role is and how it contributes to the client experience and ultimately contributes to the outcomes you're driving, some of that becomes inherent and in just not getting the result. And so, I think it can depend. What I'm a big proponent of is ensuring that every area of the organization is evaluated by the voice of our client. And
That's the
becomes
score.
the score.
Yeah.
That and how we fare to our competition become the score. And from that perspective, it's somewhat self-identifying and self-developing when you cascade that down from each of those areas of the business, and they align those objectives to individuals and the roles that they play. But you really do have to translate that, and not unlike any leader's role, which is to clarify what every person's role in the organization has an impact and has relevance to the various KPIs or objectives you're seeking, or how they play a role in the vision you're laying out. That's one lens to do it, is through the customer's eyes, and it can be its own self-fulfilling prophecy in that regard.
Do you have any great stories of relationships that turned and evolved as a result of trauma or stress?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly in long-term contractual relationships, having any misstep or mistake with a client may not allow them to divorce. And so you have some time to repair, and usually that's your benefit when it's an error or mistake or misset of expectations for a client that's significant enough that
right.
Could cause a rupture. And so definitely there's a lot of occasions where we've had enough time to be able to repair that. And it does take a culture that's highly responsive, that understands what's at stake, to rally and be able to perform in a way to really over-deliver and to not only acknowledge with the client, but then to really demonstrate that we've heard them, we understand the pain that they've gone through and what was at stake. And they see us collectively responding in that way.
Do you have any examples of that?
I do. I've experienced occasions where we made a mistake and it became public for the client. It wound up being something in the news with specifically their area of responsibility. So our error became their reputational harm and brought quite a lot of scrutiny to the organization, and that's an awful experience to give to a client.
Sure.
However, and they did have the option to pause our contract, and they did have the option to divorce from us. What we asked for was the opportunity to address the situation and put them in a position where we could over-deliver and make their experience one that would be best in class, if you will, and actually allow them the opportunity to stand up proud and market what they had done in the program. And that was, again, some faith that we were given. And it took some time, but the client had, as I mentioned earlier, the client had hundreds of deposits from us before that.
Sure.
They felt our sincerity. We were there with them, feeling the pain that we caused and owning that, but putting forth a plan that they could give us some room to perform to. And with every step we took to do that, rebuilt the confidence. And now they're a reference for us.
No way.
We've won additional deals because they've been able to stand up and say that this is a company that really takes, what they do for a living seriously. And this is what they stood behind, and this is what they were willing to do. And we have a premier service now. We can stand up proudly to defend that.
And so do they talk about the foible? Do they share that?
We all try not to go back there. Every now and then that we can reference the incident. But we generally like to look forward and talk about our recent success together.
I love that, because it hurting someone else's reputation. So now you're 3 steps removed from what happened. How do you manage your own emotions? So, I'm thinking of a situation early when I was running the Phelon group, and you and I worked together a couple times, and I remember a similar situation happened where we had given some information to one of our customers that they then presented to a broad group. Again, reputation's on the line, and the information was accurate, but not relevant for their use case. And so here we've now put this customer in a situation where people are now questioning not their integrity, but their intelligence. And, we ask for 90 days. So we said, give us 90 days. We're going to turn this around. Trust us. Here's what success looks like. And we ultimately did. We lost momentum in the relationship, obviously. But I remember my own emotional reaction in the moment because I started to question, like, is this you sort of go through, like, did I do the right things? So how do you slow down your team's emotional reaction? Because you immediately want to do everything and throw the kitchen sink at it, which may not be the right move.
That's a great point and a real natural tendency that everything then is on the table and we're willing to
discount, take this. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what I've learned is we go back and have the conversation. What is it that, whether it's here's what success looks like and get input on that and engagement and enrollment into that. But what I've found is not to knee jerk and put a lot of things in front of the client, which may or may not really be meeting their need, but they're going to take them anyway, right? Because you deserve it. But instead to really, again, understand what could make a difference and then focus on doing that.
So ask good questions.
Ask good questions. And as you mentioned, you're first going in to apologize. You're going to hear a lot if you listen.
Right.
What really mattered, what the implication really was. And those are, that's where you certainly can probe and have conversation that if we could do this for you, and we could do this over this time frame, would that help address this issue? Now, you've met before as a team and kind of put on the table the things that you think, right? So we're preempting it with some internal work and knowing the client and getting a sense of what might work. But we're also able to identify the things that really in the long term won't work for that client and may not work for other
others.
Clients.
Yeah.
And by having that internal dialogue, what I find is our client-facing personnel become, when they are armed with information about why we wouldn't do something or would not make sense to do something, they're in a great position to communicate that to the client if they go there. And that happens through the sales process, but it certainly happens, within the context of long-term client relationships. And when they know that you're very confident behind the things that you can do to really turn things around, sometimes we've said to clients, look, we could do that, but that's not really what we do for a living. So there's some risk in that. And we would go that route.
Right.
But if we went this route, would that meet your mark with something that we do all the time?
So I've heard three things about this. This is powerful. So one is, getting the team together to do a reality-based assessment where everyone feels safe. Because if you have, I imagine, people at the table who are like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired for this, their interpretation and where they point the finger is going to be very different than if the person knows we're looking at this as a collective group and we're going to assess it, right? We're not going to blame. So you talk about being kind of objective in our assessment. Two, you talk about having a boundary-based conversation with the customer where you ask option-based questions. If we did this, how would that move the needle for you? If we did that, but also not saying, we're going to give you the kitchen sink. We don't do this, but we're going to find a way to make it. So when you're a small business, you kind of want to throw everything at it. And your point is that may not solve the problem, but it could definitely kill the business.
Right.
But the third thing, and you kind of hint at it, is you then empower the organization with that data, because sales may have to change who it goes after, or product may need to evolve certain features or capabilities. So how does that learning get codified and then recommunicated and absorbed into the company after something like this happens?
Yeah, so you mentioned something earlier, and I'll touch, I think I'll circle around to your question. Which is avoiding blame. So blame is unproductive. It's unproductive when you're trying to solve the client's problem.
Blame is unproductive.
It's definitely unproductive when you're trying to do a retrospective and understand, where the breakdowns were. So going into it with a client when we're trying to problem solve to repair, it's based on the objective. So once again, bringing the team together with a goal in mind of our goal is to walk out of the room after this meeting having 2 or 3 options that we can present to the client that we think will solve the problem and be right for us and be right for the client. Setting those set of boundaries puts a lot on the table that the team can discuss as to pros and cons. But they will typically walk out with the best options that work all the way around. Sometimes you have to get a little more specific if there's certain boundaries that you need to put in place. On the flip side, on the retrospective, it's definitely natural to be in a room, and if you weren't the person who, or the department that caused the issue, that retrospective becomes about, well, there wasn't anything for me to do, right? Like it was, we all know that department or, those people or that broke down.
Right.
And when I start a retrospective, I will typically set some ground rules, and the retrospective is, one, my general philosophy, it's most often about process than it is about people. And so we have to understand the breakdown with the process. But the other part is, that I ask everybody to come to the table about what they personally would have done different. So we start the meeting not with what went wrong, but knowing what didn't work out, what could you and would you have done differently in your role that could have helped avoid the situation or could have mitigated the situation. And what you find then is there's actually a lot of shared opportunity there.
It goes back to your micro moments where it's not that one incident.
Yeah.
It's the many things that happened prior to.
Yes. It's, you know what? I'm the client facing person. I could have asked this question of the client.
Right.
Or if it's a missed expectation. Or I could have verified with Department X that they caught the ball. Right? There's usually, in most cases, there's something we all could have done differently. And when it's that severe, you basically then hold everyone accountable for an outcome that a lot of times someone could say, well, that wasn't my job. What this becomes is it's everyone's job to be responsible to deliver a terrific service to the client.
I love that. So kind of to wrap up, I mean, again, bringing it back to sports. I mean, you and I both played sports, and obviously, I wasn't the captain of a basketball team at Cornell, but I imagine a lot of this has been trained into you by watching videos and by the retrospective that happens after a game, even when you win. So do you do this when you crush it with a customer? Like, is there space for also saying, okay, what did we do right? And celebrating that. So how do you think about that as well?
That's a great question. And I would say all too often the tendency is to address the problems and then move on to the next thing. I'm a big fan and really subscribe to that acknowledgement in a public setting for an outcome that was achieved by the business is a shared outcome. And so when I'm hosting, town halls or managers meetings or sending out email communications about updates on the business, or as I call them, high fives, that's where my being a jock crosses over with being a business leader, is good news gets met with a high five. And so when that occurs, well, certainly individuals often have, maybe more or less of a prominent role. They're shared successes, because even in the case where a salesperson closes the deal, there's often multiple people that help support them in the process, and it could be finance, and it could be more, it could be a number of different things. So I think that celebration is synonymous to me with team celebration, and it could be a small team or it could be a very large team. We've celebrated, when we launched our first new product in 7 years this year, in a 220 person organization, there were 75 people involved, and they individually each were acknowledged one by one for the contribution they made. To the team.
So that anti-fragility also comes through some level of acknowledging where we've been excellent and where things have gone right.
Absolutely. There's nothing that makes you feel, for me personally, more connected to a team is when you win together and you also lose together. And you talk about anti-fragile teams, teams that have been through each of those cycles together are and have done so in a way that they've stayed focused on the external objectives versus a blaming culture or pointing fingers culture. That's a real sticky team. It's had some real experiences together. And my experience in business is it's actually really rare to achieve that.
Well, congratulations on your recent IPO. That's phenomenal. It's been beautiful to watch. You've said so many incredible things, and it's been an honor knowing you for 20 plus years.
You're aging us.
I know. But one of the things I really took away from this, which is blame is never productive, because that you lose in your road the safety that you're talking about, which has to be there in order to look objectively at the situation. So I honor that, and I think that's huge. And I feel like you being an athlete, it's so easy to blame that one person who missed that shot. But to your point, if we were 15 points up, it wouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter. Thank you for sitting in my car under a bridge and trains going by and whatnot. So
My pleasure.
Thank you, Elizabeth Caracciolo, for being here with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Hey guys, wow. What did you think about that? Didn't love the sound quality, but the quality of the conversation, pretty tremendous. Thanks for sticking in with us. I just had the opportunity to interview Liz, and so we pulled over in the middle of the evening under a bridge in Berkeley and had that incredible conversation. So, wow. So much to say there, but you really get the point now about being anti-fragile. Eager to hear your thoughts about that. You can always hit me up at hello@thegrowthwarrior. Would love to hear from you and get your thoughts about these podcasts. But what you heard was this athlete, this leader, this seasoned executive from a public company that's had a tremendous amount of growth talk openly and honestly about leadership in a shifting economy. And I love the conversation, so I appreciate you guys telling me what you thought about it. So that was Liz Caracciolo, the EVP and General Manager of Government Solutions at Verra Mobility, VERRA Mobility. Usually this is when I tell you about that person who we've interviewed, their social media presence. I would give you $1 if you're able to find Liz's social media presence. All right, hope all's well. Thanks again for you coming in. Take care.